Fist Stripes live with your, I guess I'm a backup host, Eli Sussman right here, along with Isaac Azout, with Adam Akbani, Alex Carver, our special guest, Isaac Shapiro, who you can find on Twitter at 7017. You can find all our Twitter handles at the bottom, coming at you right at the ends of the winter meetings. The Marlins saved their best for last, which, I mean, they saved the only thing they did for the very end, the Rule 5 draft. We'll get into that pretty briefly in just a few moments. Just generally speaking, I'll just throw it to the comments right from the very beginning with Mike Boyd weighing in. Thank you for everybody who comments along. If you want us to read and display your comments, send them to YouTube or Twitch, but we appreciate everybody on Twitter as well. With Mike asking, did we honestly think this organization would do something during the winter meetings, obviously excluding the Rule 5? Isaac Shapiro, I just want to go to you first. How are we feeling about the inactivity at the meetings? Where are you in terms of the overreaction to the fact that this team is still basically identical to where it was a month, 2 months ago? Yeah,
well, I mean, we kind of knew they weren't going to play with the big free agents, and I feel like that's really all that's gone so far. I kind of thought that the bigger free agents would sign like once the first couple went on Friday and Sunday, that it would kind of keep going with like the rest of the shortstops and Rodon, and then we'd start to see the trades pick up. But I still think we need a couple more dominoes to fall before the trades really start to pick up. And I think that's when we're going to see, like, you know, the rumors about Pablo and the teams that are interested. Because I know, you know, we know that teams are interested, and it's just kind of about the flow of the offseason. I'm not too worried.
I can tell. And that is generally how it goes historically. So if you want to look at previous off seasons, that is generally the sequence of events where the free agents, the guys that are unsigned, they have a little bit more motivation to get signed. The teams that have trade pieces to move, there's no firm deadline to move those guys, even prior to spring training, even prior to opening day. And from that standpoint, I think that is some common sense. But I know Isaac Azout in particular, something you've pointed out is that the approach with this team, even though they're waiting on some deals, that if we were going back a couple of years to the Mike Hill days or anybody else, they would maybe act with more urgency one way or the other, just knowing that the obvious areas this team needs to address, with Kim herself even mentioning that they know they need multiple hitters to add to where they currently stand, and yet they haven't added to them at this point. Is there anything to that despite the way that the market is moving, that there comes a point where if you're desperate enough, if there's enough urgency, that maybe something should have been done by now to get them closer to where they need to be, at least on that side of the ball?
Yeah, I mean, you'd think after watching all of last season and looking at the center field situation, I don't know how much more desperate a team can be for a center fielder. And then this certain player that, you know, I think we all know who we're talking about, he actually requested a trade from his current team. And that guy is still not a Marlin. He could have been a Marlin at the trade deadline. He could have been a Marlin at the winter meetings last year. And I think that, you know, imagine he goes somewhere else. Imagine another team beats Miami to trading for this great player. What are you going to do? You're not going to be able to get Brandon Nimmo. You're not going to be able to get these star-studded guys. You're going to really be left with a Michael A. Taylor type guy. So, you know, obviously I don't want to act like I'm a general manager at all, but if I were her, I would be moving with a little bit more. I got to get things done a little bit quicker, because I'm just so terrified that Philadelphia or Boston makes a move for Brian Reynolds, and then Miami's really got nothing left to pivot to. So that's what I'm worried about currently. And maybe they got to wait till Brandon Nimmo signs and see what the market would be for Reynolds. But if I were them, I would give them whatever they'd like. Obviously, you know, no Yuri, no Sandy, but give him a couple of your starting pitchers, maybe a position player prospect, a top prospect, and get it done, because he automatically becomes the best player on the Miami Marlins instantly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. I think this is something that we've got to get done, and it's probably a move we should have tried to get done earlier this offseason, just because we know some of the value might increase just a little bit incrementally as you see guys starting to get picked up in signs. That's going to affect his trade value, right? So we see a guy like Brian Reynolds is really the only option that we've been talking about, been thrown around as a center fielder, really the one that's gotten the most traction. Obviously, we've thrown around some outfielders in the free agency, like Isaac mentioned, Nimmo. but he's not really someone you think is a Miami Marlin, just given the fact that the front office has been super reluctant to kind of open the checkbook in that way. So if anything, they might be willing to do it for Brian Reynolds' extension if they were to acquire him. But you obviously you can't put the cart before the horse. And doing everything you can to acquire that star center fielder the team hasn't had in years is probably the first thing that they should have on their list going into this offseason. And they haven't really gotten accomplished yet. So a little worrisome nonetheless.
Yeah, we'll get back to Reynolds in just a few minutes. We want to touch on this Rule 5 draft with the Marlins adding Nick Enright, reliever in the major league phase, with the 9th overall pick, and then picking up 3 other players in the minor league phase, and all the while not losing anybody. So it's hard to say this is anything but a successful moment for this organization to add talent at several levels of the organization without losing anybody. In your short time, Alex, looking over this Nick Enright guy, what are your conclusions about what they're getting with this player who projects to be in the opening day bullpen as long as he stays healthy and shows a little something in spring training?
Yeah, sure. So AA and AAA last year, right? For was it Cleveland, I think? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They got him from? Yeah. So AA and AAA 2.88 ERA. Strikeouts to walks ratio looks pretty good. Looks like 3 pitches just from the brief highlights that I was able to watch before the show. So it looks good. I would definitely, obviously, he has to be on the 40-man roster, right? It's an MLB portion. So, yeah, I would say you're right. Think he will be in the bullpen as long as he's healthy. And that's something that I will say, Eli, that I do think that you guys will be pleased with the Marlins bullpen next year with the guys that they added that were Rule 5 eligible, some of which I could have seen going if they did not add them, like Josh Simpson, maybe George Soriano. If they did not add them, maybe they would have gone maybe in the major league portion as somebody would have recognized their talent. They added Nardi. He had his struggles a little bit at the end of last year, but I think these other 2 pitchers in Soriano and Simpson are a little bit further ahead than where Nardi even was. He was pitching in AAA. So I really think that this is going to be a better look bullpen for the Marlins next year. Reynolds in there as well, your guy. So guy that can just come in and pump straight 100. Sometimes maybe needs to figure out where it's going at times, right? But
maybe.
Other than that, I think it'll be a fun young bullpen to watch on Enright added into the situation now. So I think it'll be better, much younger bullpen, but I think it'll be better.
Yeah, I guess on one end they still have Blyer kicking around.
Yeah, he's bringing the average age up a bit, but other than that, much younger pen, I would say.
Well, it's just worrisome to me because you mentioned that they're going to be depending on these young guys for a lot of innings in later in the season, especially. And who's to say they don't struggle like Vesia, like Nardi did in their first cup of coffee? And if Marlins are in relevant games in July and August, they're going to need some major league, established arms in that bullpen, in my opinion. They learned that last year. That's why they went to Sulzer and Scott. I think the difference is that they need good ones this time. So as along with the bats, obviously this Rule 5 pick was nice, but I think that's something else that Ms. Kimming needs to address for sure. Not to change the
I think your overall difference, and I understand what you're saying, Isaac, that it's, you're looking at guys that have never pitched in Major League Baseball before. And one guy in Reynolds who just started pitching 2 seasons ago.
Yeah.
So, and you're going to count on them for looks to be a lot, right?
Yeah.
I think the difference is they'll be here from the start of the season. They have the security knowing that they're on the roster for now. And Enright all year. But yeah, I mean, overall, I just think that, like I said, they called him Nardi. I thought Nardi was ready. I thought Simpson and Soriano were even more ready than Nardi when that happens. So, I think it's good to get younger like that. Blyer is still here somehow with his struggles last year. I know they paid him last year as well, so don't want to waste money, of course, with this frugal Marlins organization. But overall, I think getting younger in the bullpen is not necessarily always a bad thing. So I think we need to wait and see what happens, but I'm not against this at all.
And they're pretty electric arms too. It's not like they're tossing
they have
92,
stuff. Like, it's good
93.
stuff.
I mean, they're pumping high 90s with good breaking ball. The one thing with Enright that I think I saw Arm post is that his fastball is like low 90s, but it had a .490 OPS against. So I thought that was pretty surprising that a slow fastball would produce those results.
Yeah,
for context, that's not just great. I mean, that's like the elite of the elite. Usually, the fastball is the one pitch that is most often barreled up. When you look at general results against a fastball, because there's more contact against that pitch, usually more hard contact. Like to have an OPS against that's, as you said, like in under 500, that I imagine that is probably as good as any reliever that was available to them in the Rule 5. And just on the stat line, this is something that's more publicly available from Fangraphs. This is the last 2 seasons out of all pitchers with 100+ innings pitched in the minors. Anybody who's listening that's even a casual like prospect watcher, you know the names Andrew Painter and Daniel Espino and Grayson Rodriguez. They are in no particular order, like 3 of the top 5 pitching prospects in the world right now. And there's Nick Enright right behind them in terms of strikeout minus walk rate over the last couple of years. So not only missing a ton of bats, but the command that he showed while pitching mostly in the upper minors during that time. It's no surprise that he was one of the very first relievers off the board in this instance. And we'll see how it works. Just to give some context, some recent Rule 5, some other pitchers the Marlins have picked up. They picked up Brett Graves 5 years ago. They picked up Sterling Sharp. They picked up Paul Campbell. These are guys that all had various levels of minor league success, right before getting picked. And, it didn't really translate to the majors that much. So this is why these guys are available in the first place. But, to give it full context, like this is a Rule 5. There was no major league phase of the Rule 5 last year. So there were players that would have been eligible to go last year. There were more players, like quality players, that couldn't be protected this year compared to the usual year. That's why, if there was a year to make a pick in the Rule 5, there are a lot of players that were available in this class that have a talent level that you usually don't see available during this process. Yeah. So it was hard for them to go wrong, even though, I'd love to see them get more experienced and established players in different roles, especially in high leverage. But it really is hard for me to poke holes in this pick, considering what Enright did right before changing teams right here.
Yeah, with no MLB portion last year, those guys carried over, right? So you have more a turnover that we didn't see before because obviously MLB portion got canceled last year. But yeah, I mean, just overall on this bullpen as a last for me on this, Eli, like Isaac Shapiro said, it's good stuff. You got Reynolds with the heat. You got Eli Villalobos, who has a really good changeup. I think is his best pitch. Soriano has a dead nasty slider. And then Simpson really just has a mix of a couple of different pitches that he can use at any time, and it's mid-90s. And then this guy, it's another different look because he has the low 90 stuff, but it's dancing all over the place, like you said, and he limits contact as he was able to do. So I think it's a bunch of different looks from a bunch of different younger guys, but I think that will add up to what we hope to be a pretty effective bullpen. So we'll see what happens. And then behind guys like Sandy, and hopefully, Trevor bounces all the way back, and Pablo's his usual self is too, if he's still here. So, yeah, I mean, Isaac said they'll count on them for a lot of innings, and they will. But with the starting pitching that is here, the starting pitching depth that the Marlins have, I don't think they're going to be counted on much more than what they did in their minor league careers season to season. So, except for maybe Reynolds. But, yeah, that's what I'll say for that. I think it's definitely interesting to see them get a lot younger in the bullpen, but I think it's a good thing.
Last thing on Enright, just one of you guys can answer. What is it that allows him to miss so many bats? Can you guys mention the low 9? Is it spin rate? Is it funky? Like, what is it that allows him to miss so many bats?
It's his curveball. That was just going to get into that. That's his real selling point as a pitcher. And obviously, one man's trash is another man's treasure. With the Guardians having a lot of pitching prospects, and that says a lot about the Marlins too, because we do, but they're very, very good as well. He definitely has a plus curveball, but the fastball, although it kind of sits in the mid-90s, like you mentioned earlier, it doesn't have a lot of movement. It doesn't tend to rise the way that you would like in a lot of fastballs from a guy who we should be throwing a lot harder. Like you mentioned, the command is kind of there. You would like to see it kind of improve as as time goes on. Did kind of get touched up in AAA, kind of locating that fastball kind of missed location. But if he's able to continue and find hitting his spots and hitting his mark with that fastball, carrying it with that breaking ball at 12-6, I think it's going to be an absolute killer in the bullpen, especially with the kind of movement that it induces. I think he could be a very effective reliever as long as he continues to file out that fastball.
He's got a bit of a funky delivery too. And I think someone online compared it to James Karinchak, or that's how you pronounce it. Kind of just a funky look. So that should probably help a little bit too.
And just to touch on the minor league phase guys, as a reminder, the minor league phase guys, they don't go on the 40-man roster. They just go temporarily on the AAA roster, and some of them don't even need to begin the season in AAA. The Marlins kind of have full flexibility with where to use Dane Myers, Austin Roberts, Christian Charl, all these guys that were left unprotected by the Tigers organization, one of them by Christian Charl, I know it was the Pirates organization. And last year's hero, Charles LeBlanc, he was a minor league phase pickup for people that don't remember. Obviously, he was at AAA Jacksonville. He raked up there, finally forced his way up in the middle of the season. That's uncommon. That's not usual, but it happened with LeBlanc. It happens, if you go way back, it happened with Justin Bohr. He was originally a minor league phase guy. Every few years, that's kind of the success rate, is every few years you get a serviceable player in the minor league phase of the Rule 5. So we'll see what they get with Meyer and Roberts, Charl. I do want to touch on some kind of big names who did move around during the winter meetings. This is just a sampling of the hitters who have signed free agent deals so far this offseason. We're recording on the same day that Aaron Judge finally sealed the deal with the Yankees to go back there. Wilson Contreras, just a few minutes before we went live, the Japanese outfielder that went to the Red Sox. Let me get his name on there.
Masataka Yoshida.
With combining his posting fee going for over $100 million and breaking Seiya Suzuki's Japanese contract record from just a year ago. Of these guys, I guess Adam, I'm curious, out of all the players who have signed, which one of these deals from a team's perspective are you do you think is going to pan out the best? Because as we know, a lot of these prices are inflated compared to even where they were a couple of years ago. The league is rolling in cash, kind of like never before. But where do you think somebody got a really efficient deal for one of these players on the hitting side so far?
Yeah, so I mean, if we're thinking straight from a dollars per WAR perspective, I mean, you can't go wrong with having potential 7 wins at $40 million for Judge. That just goes how good he is, and if you could pay him more, if it was normal to do so, they probably would. But I think you're going to see a lot of value in a potential Cody Bellinger deal, right? He was just 3 years removed from being arguably one of the best players in baseball, won a National League MVP in 2019, and obviously we've seen his swing take a damper. But I feel that, at $17.5 million there, if you can try to find a tweak in his bat, if the Cubs can do so, then I can absolutely see him potentially returning to form. And then, obviously it's just for 1 year, but if you can get 4 to 5 wins out of Cody Bellinger, which I think if you can tweak his swing, you absolutely can. At 17.5, that's a steal. And then he goes into free agency next year, signs a much longer deal, and then the rest, we'll see from there. But I think if you're going to pick a couple of guys, you're going to go with your AL MVP, who had arguably one of the most overpowered seasons in Major League history. And then probably the guy who's your former MVP, who's taken a 1-year prove-it deal, who could potentially sign a 9-figure deal 12 months from now.
Yeah.
Aside Isaac Azut, aside from those two guys, are there any deals that you're really envious of that you wish the Marlins would have been in the bidding for?
Yeah, I mean, he beat me with the Cody Bellinger one. I like that one as well. Although he got a little bit more than I thought he would. I thought he would get at least a couple million less than what his arbitration number would have been. But the one that has a little bit of risk, but just seems like a slam dunk for me, the Cardinals signing Wilson Contreras, they don't go wrong. And he is one of the best catchers in all of baseball. And, you're paying that guy $17 million a year. You have your backstop. You have the perfect Yadier Molina replacement. And for me, that's just a great deal for the team friendly, great deal for the player, great deal for the team. And that's the one for me where the Cardinals did really well with that player for sure.
No, one thing I wanted to kind of hop on there with Isaac about Contreras is that, the Cardinals pitching staff being so spoiled with having a shepherd behind the plate for the past 20 years, like Molina has been, you're going to want someone who probably knows what they're doing behind the plate. And I think, there's been a lot of negative narratives around Contreras, but I think it's a little overstated. I do believe in his receiving skills, and he's a nasty thrower too. He's got probably one of the best arms as a catcher, but I'm excited, and I think it's definitely a necessary hole they had to fill. We saw the gap this year with the Cardinals, but that's just what I wanted to add on with Contreras.
In this market, I was surprised that Josh Bell didn't get a little more length to his deal. To see Jose Abreu get 3 years and Josh Bell get 2, given the 6 or 7 year age difference between them, and some of the same limitations, but also some of the same upside if everything clicks right. That's what surprised me, because that was a player that Kim volunteered mentioning, that aside from Bellinger, that they had some interest in Josh Bell. At 2 years, $33 million. There is an opt-out in the middle of that, which I guess favors the player, obviously, if they have a great year in 2023. But that was the one that surprised me most from the totals perspective. I thought he could have gotten a little bit more. And even though he wasn't my favorite fit with the Marlins exactly, maybe there are more teams that kind of felt the same way. I just thought that he would end up with a little more than he did. And just quickly, I want to hop over to the pitchers as well. There's a lot more to choose from at this point, where I think generally this is something I'll get into a little bit later, is that some of the prices that went to these pitchers, including some guys, that you really don't count on being much more than a back end type of starting pitcher. The salaries that these guys are getting relative to players on the Marlins that can obviously be available in trades, when you see the type of guarantees that pitchers can get, even those that don't really have anything more than very average-ish upside and projections, I think it just augments the trade value that the Marlins guys have in this market moving forward, considering the savings here. See Taijuan Walker get $18 million a year over 4 years, to seeing Jameson Taillon get almost the same thing there, as had been pretty widely commented on. Justin Verlander setting a new record for average annual value in a deal over his couple-year deals as well. On this side, the one that stuck out to me as being a pretty good value was Quintana. Jose Quintana, given that he has a pretty lengthy track record of at least eating innings, and there was that recent kind of dip in his production, but he had a big bounce back in 2022. And for the Mets to get that, and for him to come in at a rate that's actually a lot lower than most of the other starters, I think that's going to prove to be a pretty efficient one for them.
I think in here, just above Quintana, Tyler Anderson, I think he ended up getting maybe cheated out of a few dollars by signing really early. When he first signed the 3 for 39, was it, or 36? It was 39. It seemed like a little bit of an overpay, but then you saw like Matt Boyd get like $10 million for a year. You saw Taijuan get, $18 million, and Jameson Taillon get $18 million. And that made me kind of realize that I think Anderson, while he's not that great of a pitcher, it kind of became a bargain deal as the winter meetings went on, just because of these kind of crazy deals that these pitchers have been getting.
What about Andrew Heaney, former Marlins draft pick, right there? That, 32, had a good year last year. Between what was he on 2 teams last year? Yeah. Going from the Dodgers now to the Rangers, which is a more pitcher friendly environment. As you can see, a 2.5 projected WAR next year. Like, I think that's a pretty team friendly deal for $12.5 million. Even in an age 32 season, he proved he could still do it last year. I think that's a good deal. So I would definitely say that one as well, on top of Quintana, which I think you're right, Eli. But I would say Heaney, that's a lefty too. Definitely a good deal for him.
One of the deals that actually surprised me in a bad way that I don't think will pan out very well is the 3 years, $40 million for Zach Eflin. He's a good serviceable guy that's been known to eat some innings as well. But Zach Eflin, what is he, a number 5, number 6 type starter, if I'm not mistaken? And 3 years, $40 million. Wow, imagine what Trevor Rogers or Pablo Lopez is worth for 2 more years of club control. So it's just wow. It's inflated.
If the Rays are paying out the biggest contract in team history to Zach Eflin, I have a feeling that they're gonna unlock something with him. They probably identified something.
I don't get it. He was like, every time Miami would face Philly, I would hope that Zach Eflin was pitching. But he had a good showing in the postseason, so maybe that's why.
Good.
Yeah, I think just to go back really quick, like the Heaney thing, probably because he was injured last year, only 72 innings. But yeah, I mean, he's kind of skipped around, like I said, 2 teams in 2021. Now he's back in the NL. Now he's back in the AL. So he's switching around a bit. But if he can stay healthy, I think he can still do it. So I think it's a good deal.
He said a weird transformation. The fact that he's become, even when he was struggling in 2021, really high strikeout rate, but also
Yeah.
that sky high home run rate.
Yeah.
Then with the Dodgers early on, he was looking pretty fantastic because the home runs were down. And as the year went on, as it got towards the end of the year, he's just going back to what he was the previous year. And by the time they got to the postseason, he barely had any role or any trust in them at that stage of the season, which is why they were able
110-19 KBB though. Like he doesn't walk guys. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know. In 72 innings too, 110-19 KBB. The guy doesn't walk anybody, but like you said, control issues can kind of mount. But again, I think that's a good deal. Anyways, enough on him. That's all I got.
Yeah, I wanted to just pull up some general comments. This is one that we got from Anthony early on about what they do from here, the Marlins, as we mentioned, because of the elevated prices that free agent starters are getting, and that probably the remaining ones, like Rodon, who else is still out there? Kodai Senga is still out there. I mean, compared to those guys, the Marlins, not only their guys have many years of team control, but low salary, that naturally this is going to be a big topic of conversation the next few months. If our front office finally decides to trade Pablo, what teams do you want to trade for him? And what prospects from the team do you want? Yeah, there are.
What team do you guys want to trade for him? So we're trading Pablo for a whole team? No, I'm just kidding.
You just kind of like, it's really not like what team like specifically. It's just whoever offers the biggest return. Ideally, there'll probably be like a team we've heard, like the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Astros, the Giants, yada yada yada. Anyone who misses out on one of the big fish this offseason is probably going to want to go for Pablo Lopez. And we're probably going to get a pretty good package for him, right? Like Eli mentioned, the elevation and the inflation of the salaries this year is definitely going to affect how much value we're going to get in return, because it's all coming down to the same dollars per word perspective. So when we talk about the kind of return we would want, we definitely want to have a top tier hitting prospect, or about as good as hitting prospects you can get. Someone up the middle, someone who can play shortstop, potentially a catcher or a center fielder. You've heard names like Diego Cartaya from the Dodgers. If it ever gets to that point, you've heard like Oswald Peraza from the Yankees. Jason Dominguez is a reach name, but is someone that has been thrown in the packages, has been talked about. But that's the kind of idea I want to lay out. Is that it's probably going to be in contending team, someone who wants and needs starting pitching, and who misses out on it. And you definitely want somewhere that's going to fill in a position up the middle, and it's going to be a very good bat that could be here for many years.
I felt they could have maybe avoided having to trade him at all, because, at this point, I think it's fair to say you got 6 starting pitchers that are major league ready. And if one of them gets hurt, 2 of them gets hurt from just a normal injury, who you got to call up? Uri, you want to be careful with. You get Eaters coming back from surgery, and you have these, Francesby. You lost Eliezer, you lost Nick Neidert. So they just could have avoided having to trade Pablo. He might get dealt at the deadline, but they could have gone into this season with all 6 guys, having one of them starting the bullpen, signed Cody Bellinger to 1 year, 15, or maybe even gone up to 17 and a half, who could play first base also, give Cooper a day off there. He plays center field, play very good, very, very well all over the place. And because you're going to need all these starting pitchers. So it's just like this conversation reminds you of the fact that it's just shame that they have to resort to trading, your surplus of starting pitching when you're most likely going to need it during the season. So I think that's just the way you got to look at it. It shouldn't be the situation.
Yeah, I'm sorry to say this, Gabriel, but I think we're all sleeping on Sixto. We're still sleeping pretty peacefully at this point. I did see him working out on Instagram a few days ago, not with his arm though. It was like some cardio or footwork exercise.
You got to start somewhere.
So yeah, we'll see what they get from him, but not counting on much. Going into the offseason, one thing that I was like, in my mind, planning out a successful offseason would have involved trading some of the rotation depth, but also being able to replenish it in free agency. Like I figured that given that their guys have so much value due to their low salary and their many years of control, that they would maybe plug one of those spots with a veteran of some kind on a one-term deal, like a Sean Manaea,
Kyle Gibson,
even Kyle Gibson, somebody in that range. But then when you see the dollars that these guys are getting, even the ones that you don't project to be impact pitchers, that doesn't seem to be something that they're going to actively consider anymore. And you get into this situation, as Isaac mentioned, where you're going to have to trade significant pieces from your major league team. And you wonder if the end result is even going to be that much of a net positive for this team, just because you have a lot of long-term starting pitching options, but some of these guys, they're inexperienced or they're coming off injuries or both. And they're in this pretty tough situation where there's still free agents out there, but it's really going to be hard to put this together in any sort of logical way without doing something in free agency that doesn't require you sacrificing talent of some kind. Like just going back to the Rule 5, the fact that they didn't lose anybody in the Rule 5, it just shows you that, the depth in this organization, in this farm system is nothing special at this point. They've been rebuilding for a while. They've been trying to do new things in terms of developing players and getting the best out of them. And the end result is almost every year during the Rule 5, other teams aren't particularly interested in their players, or at least in their unprotected players. And a lot of their protected players, once they reach the big leagues, they're not having success, especially on the hitting side, mainly, which is how you get into this really undesirable situation. If you don't spend money and your young players aren't making much of a contribution, and there's not a whole lot of silver linings here. You need to be really successful in some facet. And right now, they're successful in their starting rotation at the major league level. And almost everything else, there's some concerns about.
I think your hope, and this may be the silver lining, I think your hope is that, and you're right about what you say about offensive production. I think the hope is with new blood in the building in terms of how they're going to be developing hitting, and maybe a new mindset. Hopefully a new mindset with how they're going to be developing hitters, is that maybe they'll unlock some guys, right? So some guys that you kind of see the peripheral skills in, they haven't done it yet because they haven't been developed the right way. At least doesn't seem like it. So hopefully new development team can unlock some of those players, and the Marlins can get something out of these guys that have been around for a little while. But yeah, you're right. I think the only one that I was worried about going in the Rule 5 was Troy Johnston. Didn't go, thankfully. But I think he could contribute. One of few guys down in the minors who I think offensively could contribute right away if they need him. And I think he will if there's injury to maybe an outfielder or one of the first basemen. Cooper has the injury history, so he would come to mind. Hopefully not, but that's what will come to mind. So, yeah, I mean, you're right. It's unfortunate that they've been building this for such a long time. And on the offensive side of the baseball, not much has happened. So
nothing has happened.
Right. I do want to point out, just to be clear, we touched on this already. One of the takeaways from this offseason so far is that they are not satisfied with what they have at first base right now.
Right.
Because they did make an offer reportedly to Jose Abreu, and Kim Ng said herself that they had some sort of engagement with Josh Bell. They're not fully handing that position to Garrett Cooper on an everyday basis. All-star Garrett Cooper, who last year actually made it as a DH, being an all-star last year, that they feel there's room to upgrade, room to potentially add somebody on a multi-year deal, that if they were involved with Bell and involved with Abreu, then perhaps there are other options there. We've talked about, I don't know if we've talked about it on stream, we've talked about it in other platforms about trade targets like Christian Walker of the Diamondbacks, who's coming off a really great year, both power-wise and defensively. Other than that, there's not a whole lot of obvious first baseman that'd be a clear upgrade over Cooper. I don't know. Isaac Shapiro, does anybody come to mind at first base that you think they might look at either free agency or trade, given who they've already missed out on?
Well, I was going to say Christian Walker. I mean, you can't beat the fielding hitting combo, and then maybe if you pony up a Luzardo or a Trevor, you can maybe get him with an outfielder, a center fielder, kind of kill two birds with one stone. At this point, I'm looking at maybe like Brandon Belt.
Yes.
There really isn't much going on. Maybe Yuli Gurriel. He's a little old, but he hit lefties pretty well. Because Cooper's pretty good against righties, so you're really just looking for someone who can hit lefties pretty well. Carlos Santana hit lefties pretty well. He actually would have been a fine pickup for the $6 million that he cost for 1 year. But this is kind of why I think that Brandon Drury would make a lot of sense if the money's right. I know he might get overpaid by some team looking for some help, but Drury can play third, he can play second, he can play first, and he mashed lefties. He had like a 160 something weighted, WRC plus against lefties. So I think if you added jury, he could fill in for Coop, for Jazz against left-handed pitchers and really provide some punch against lefties, which, I mean, the Marlins were terrible against lefties.
I think
historically terrible against lefties, about as bad
Terrible.
as any team has ever been in a single season.
I think the question that a lot of fans will have, and the question that we ask ourselves, right? And I've seen it floating around on Twitter, and it's a fair question, and I doubt there's an answer to it. But when are the Marlins going to be this team that goes from, oh yeah, we asked about the guy, to the team that actually signs the guy, right? And that's a very difficult question to answer. But man, Jose Abreu would have been so perfect here. Hits for average, hits for power. He's decent on defense. Like, put him in the middle of the lineup, hit him fifth, whatever, fourth, whatever. Like, again, like Isaac said about Reynolds, I think he would instantly become the best player on the team, definitely from an offensive perspective. And you have that staring you in the face, and you're just not doing it. And then you see him go to the Astros, and you know he's going to kill it there. It's a hitter-friendly environment. It's just like there needs to be a switch in that mentality that, yeah, we're going to talk to guys, but we're probably not that serious, right? The Marlins saw probably $19.5 million from the Astros. I mean, I don't see them matching that, but that's what needs to change, is the ability to match stuff like that. Does money go into that? Does budget go into that? Yes, of course. There's business behind it, of course. Yes, but man, until stuff like that changes, I don't think fan support will change. And when you're looking at these second and third tier guys, I mean, they're fine major league players, like Isaac pointed out. Brandon Belt, great major league player, but behind Jose Abreu, you're again second tier. So that's what needs to change here. That whole mindset of going from talking to guys and being in on guys, however far in that they were, to actually getting it done is the exact problem right now overall. With if they want to win now, that's the main problem.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a mentality thing. I think it's just they don't have the money. You saw what Abreu got. What was it, 56 over 3? Or
yeah,
something?
19.5 per season. Yeah.
That's not something that a team that is, not very wealthy can afford.
Sure.
As soon as I saw what Eli, what did you put in your thing? 2 years, how much million of the perfect offseason for Miami piece?
That was 2 years, 32.
Right.
I personally did expect him to get more than that, but that was based on some various sources' predictions at the start of the offseason. So some in the industry definitely were surprised by it. I wasn't. I thought Abreu could have and deserved to get 3 years just based on his pretty amazing track record.
He could have maybe gotten 4, or possibly by some really desperate team. But my point is that Miami will never be that team that's going to, outbid the Houston Astros or the LA Dodgers, unfortunately. And because of that, it is easier to go through the free agency route. Yeah, you have to compete with 29 other teams, but all you need is the money. And you look at the position of need, you go to the player, you sign them, that's it. So now you got to go to trades, and it's a lot more difficult to conduct trades. And unfortunately, Kim Ng hasn't exactly shown the ability yet to, finesse great trades yet. We haven't seen it. I know she traded for Xavier Edwards, and she made a couple of trades, but we haven't really gotten a banger yet. So until she proves that, she's up there, they're just in a spot where they can't do it in free agency or trades right now. And it's really stinky.
One thing I wanted to bring up, this comment from Gabriel about Luzardo compared to Rogers, and which of the two we like long-term and who we'd rather trade. I mean, this is a take that I've really come so far around on Luzardo based on how he finished last year. I'm totally enamored with him. I went from being somebody that wasn't sure he'd make any improvement from 2021 to 2022 to thinking that out of anybody aside from Sandy, I think he is going to be the number 2 in this rotation moving forward. The development he's shown as a pitcher ever since Marlins got him barely a year ago has been amazing. The way that he's commanding his fastball better, the improvement he's shown with his changeup, and the fact that he has as much confidence as ever in his breaking ball as well. The ability that he had late last year to go deep into games, not just prevent runs, but actually do it 3 times through an order, was something I didn't see coming. If it's me making the calls, Luzardo is somebody that I wouldn't really trade under any circumstances this offseason. I feel like his value is just going to get even higher from where it is right now. And I mentioned it just now because talking about trades, I mean, that is one that at the time there was a lot of people upset about how they botched the Starling Marte situation, that they couldn't work out an extension with him. And when it came time to field offers, they made this interesting move on Luzardo, given his prospect pedigree. They bought low on a guy that used to be regarded as an amazing prospect, and now we're a year and a half later, and he's basically back on track to where the experts thought he would be coming up through the minor leagues. So that's something that's been a bright spot for sure of this past year. And I think moving forward, that if you look at the upside of this rotation, the potential for this to be an amazing rotation as soon as 2023, I think Luzardo is going to be a huge part of that.
So to touch on what you said just at the very end, we've got the opportunity to have 4 near elite starting pitchers. We've got Sandy Alcantara, you've got potentially Yuri Perez, you have Rogers and Luzardo, and then, other guys coming down the line who covered for that 5th spot. If you want to trade Pablo, go ahead and do that. But to think that we have potential 2 potential 4 more like war pitchers on our roster, like Luzardo could be that. He was once the best pitching prospect in all of baseball. Rogers is 1 year removed from being an all-star, and I think he can absolutely rebound and come back to that, if not come very close to, and that would be very good. I think if we're going to cut ties with someone, it should be Pablo, because if you got that punch with Yuri, with Sandy, with Edward Cabrera, another name, with Jesus and Rogers, and other names that I haven't even mentioned that are in AAA and AA and in the minor leagues, other levels. It's just, I find it so hard to say, hey, this is just, you have a chance to set up arguably the best rotation in all of baseball if you hold on to these 2 guys and trade the other. It's just, for me, even if you have that need on the diamond, I just think you've got to hold on to both of them, and then probably get rid of the guy who has the least amount of team control left and has the least amount of time to prove to get even better.
Yeah, I think there's some intangibles with that. One, he is your best player's best friend. You think you got to take that somewhat into consideration. 2, he's probably the second most established pitcher that you have. And number 3 is that he probably has a very limited amount of suitors. I think Baltimore could use him. A lot of contenders could use him. But I think you look at Rogers, I think any team in baseball would take him. But like you mentioned, you only got 2 years of control left. It'd be tougher to finesse a trade. If I'm not mistaken, I would think so for Pablo than it would be for Trevor Luzardo. I would never trade Luzardo. I think Luzardo is going to be the best pitcher on the Marlins in 3 years, 4 years. So him, no, he's an extension candidate for me. But when you're coming to Rogers or Pablo, there are some intangibles that maybe point you towards looking at Rogers instead. Maybe the value is even higher for Rogers, who knows? But I think there are some things that make you think, okay, maybe you got to keep Pablo just to keep Sandy happy, honestly. And I know it's not the way to run business, but you don't want to piss him off either.
I think there are a lot of teams that are going to want Pablo, and I think one of them that you need to engage with is going to be Toronto. And I think if you can get Alejandro Kirk back, I was pretty down on Alejandro Kirk when that whole discussion was going on. I think even last offseason. But then he had a 3.8 WAR season as a catcher. And Fangraphs, I was looking at their kind of steamer projections, and usually they're pretty they kind of account for regression in guys, and so their projections are usually a little bit lower than what they were. His WAR is actually projected to be 4.3. So they're actually projecting he's going to be even better than the 3.8 WAR that he had this year. And I think it was because his expected weighted on base average was a lot higher than, it was high, it was 0.35 something, but I think it was even higher. That's probably an opportunity I think I'm looking for. But Adam mentioning New York and LA, the Dodgers and Yankees, I think those are probably the other top 2 destinations that you're looking to do.
Yeah, I was surprised when they didn't trade him last offseason to Toronto. I thought, with the 3 catches that they have, and it was even reported that they had, they exchanged some names. I was very surprised with. I was even kind of hoping that Gabriel Moreno would be available, and I think he might still be available in some sort of trade talks, given how great Kirk is and given how Jansen has just been doing swell. So yeah, it's going to be a very interesting offseason with Pablo. I'm very intrigued to see what they do, because there's no slam dunk answer, really.
I remember very clearly at this time entering last offseason, the Blue Jays, those 3 guys, if you were to rank their value at this time entering the other offseason, it was Moreno far and away number 1, the guy that was close to untouchable, that most people, that was, if not the very best catching prospect in baseball. Well, I guess Adley Rutschman was number 1, and he was probably number 2 right behind that. And then a step down, Alejandro Kirk. Everybody believed in his bat. Not very many people believed in his catching ability. And then Danny Jansen at this time last offseason, I don't think anybody was knocking down the door trying to trade for him. He certainly would have been the most available guy. And you look at it now, and as But what Isaac mentioned about how not only did Kirk perform amazingly well in 2022, but it doesn't look fluky whatsoever moving forward. I'd say that he's probably the one that's harder to obtain right now than even Moreno would be, because Moreno got his cup of coffee in the majors, but for a team that was trying to make the playoffs, he didn't really show himself to be that indispensable. I think there's enough questions about exactly how high his ceiling is that he'd probably even more available than Kirk would be at this particular moment. It's an interesting spot for this team where catcher is like the one position where you feel like if the Marlins just stood pat, they'd be all right. That Stallings he should be not quite as bad as he was last year. And that we like what we saw from Nick Fortes as well. But at the same time, I mean, this is a team that I think we could all acknowledge is multiple pieces away from being where it wants to be. And even if those improvements come at surprising places, you need to investigate everything just to make those incremental improvements.
Yeah, and if I'm Ross Atkinson crew up in Toronto, I'm thinking we've got a very good 1-2 catcher tandem with Danny Jansen and Alejandro Kirk. But I would probably want to make Gabriel Moreno the most expendable one, just because he's the one that hasn't improved it yet. Right? We've already got a proven really good catching tandem with the first two I've already mentioned who've made the major leagues and have played very, very well at an all-star caliber level. So I think Moreno might be the one who would be the cheapest out of all three if you were to acquire one. But in my opinion, I would love Alejandro Kirk. And I think he's probably the one that would have the most value and be the one that the Blue Jays would be the least or the most reluctant to trade, I would believe. But if you can, if you're talking about trading Pablo or Trevor, I would agree with you guys. I would mention that Trevor has more value, but that's why I like him a lot more, because he has the most upside for that reason. But if we had to deal one, I definitely believe that Pablo would be a suitable candidate for the Blue Jays, and I would love to get one of those three catchers in return, regardless of who it is. You can't go wrong with either one of them.
Yeah, you said it right there. You can't go wrong with any one of those. Sorry, Isaac. You can't go wrong with any one of those guys. Moreno, like at this time last year, I was like infatuated with the prospect that the Marlins could potentially acquire this guy. Then Kirk came out and he went nuts. I, like Isaac, was not too high on Alejandro Kirk going into the year, but he proved me wrong. I think he proved a lot of people wrong to do what he did on both sides of the ball. He was above average on both sides of the ball, especially offensively. So, yeah, I mean, any way that you slice that, I don't think you could go wrong. Eli, you mentioned cup of coffee for him in the majors. It was good. It was pretty damn good. So I know it's only like a handful of games that he played or whatever it was, like 20-something games. So it's whatever. It was a small sample. Of course, he has to prove it. Like Adam said, he hasn't fully proved it yet, which is why he may be more dispensable, if there is such a thing. This is still a really good prospect, though. And I think a guy that is on the opening day roster as the starting catcher over Jacob Stallings next year if he comes to Miami. But that's an if. See what happens.
Yeah, he'd be the guy for me. I think any major leaguer that comes to Miami is going to regress a little bit, but Kirk just frightens me that he might regress a little bit here in this ballpark. As I was saying, correct me if I'm wrong, Eli, but when they traded for Kikuchi last year, that sort of took them out of the Pablo running. I don't know where their starting rotation depth stands now when it comes to wanting another starting pitcher. I know Barrios.
They need one. Yeah, they're definitely looking for one.
I didn't expect Barrios to be that shit, man.
So question for all of you guys. If Moreno gets traded to the Marlins and comes in, still holds prospect status, is he the top prospect over Yuri Perez?
No,
I don't think so.
No,
I would say
top two probably then.
Yeah, he's number 2.
Yeah,
he's very firmly your second one.
Agreed.
Yeah,
agreed. But I don't think it's that far away. This guy's good, real good.
I would almost wonder if moving, if you got a Moreno or a Kirk and they kind of slide the catcher, if that would allow you to even maybe try like a Nick Fortes as a first baseman, kind of platoon DH, just to get them all at bats. I'd be kind of curious about that.
I would see how much value Fortes would have on the trade market, honestly, if they were to get a catcher. And Stallings would be my perfect backup. I would see what Fortes can get in a trade, because you got to assume it's a little bit. He's got
like Fortes so high.
He's done nothing but hit his entire short career.
I would kind of want to see the two kind of play it out together, because I mean, we haven't seen Jansen play a full year or Kirk, and granted that's because they were splitting time, but I do like Fortes a lot, and if we are going to get rid of him, I would want to see him try to we would try to get a better piece in return alongside in a Pablo trade or someone else to fill another need. But I do like Fortes a lot, and I feel like he does bring a lot of value behind the plate, and that's where it's really going to come with. It'd be hard for me to see him play another position besides catcher.
Yeah.
Fortes is like the outlier guy that had trouble hitting early in his minor league career and then started hitting. And he's the only one, right, that's been able to do that and make it permeate at the major league level. So I definitely think he'd have value on the trade market, for sure.
Right. As we wind this down, this is from Baseball Trade Values. We're all familiar with the site. Usually people are just obsessed with putting together fake trades in there. The reason why I'm showing you this is Marlins players ranked by their median trade value. So it takes into account obviously their performance, but also how many years of control they have, what their contract status is. You can forget about the numbers on the side. I'll just zoom in on the names themselves in terms of the players on this team. If you're thinking about trades, the ones who approximately might have the most value on the market at the moment, obviously Sandy far and away number one on this team. And he's the one that is so valuable where it doesn't really make sense under any circumstance to move him right now. That's Yuri Perez, number two, and Jazz closely behind him. Then it drops off to Pablo, Trevor, Luzardo, Jacob Berry, Max Meyer. This is not a perfect system. As we scroll down a little bit, Jose Salas, then Nick Fortes, Braxton Garrett, Brian De La Cruz.
Higher than Edward Cabrera?
So there's
They're disrespecting
That
Cabrera
makes
a lot.
no sense.
Wow.
Jacob Berry, very high, I will say.
No,
DLC, hold on, DLC at 17.5. Wow.
and Edward Cabrera
insane.
at 14. Not only is he
Yeah.
higher than Cabrera. Oh my God, this is a
Yiddy
load of
also
talk.
low.
Well, no, because if there's
All
anything
right.
we saw from DLC this year, there's a big paradigm shift that I had in his year that he had in September, and I guarantee you, if we talked to him and said, "What is a change in your swing from you've had in the past year?" There's something major that he's done. There's something that he's done crazily different. Something that he's done like September. We had a pod, just Eli and I, about a couple months ago, and I was like, "This guy's garbage." But now
I remember that.
around. Yeah, we completely turned it around. Like
Yeah,
the
he
fact
was
that he's no
better.
longer bad-babying his way. He made an adjustment, like completely. He's done something different, and kudos to him.
I wish Jesus Sanchez was like they're best friends, and I wish he would just be as smart as Brian De La Cruz is and making adjustments because Sanchez just doesn't make them. I have a question when it comes to Meyer. I assume this has been like with the Tommy John before Tommy John it was higher, right? Or do you think the Tommy John didn't affect it at all?
It would sound definitely was higher before the injury, not dramatically so. He was, I believe, in the 30s, right around the time when he got called up in the middle of the season. Yeah, these things vary pretty dramatically based on a few months of performance or an injury or whatnot. I think a lot of us have been clear how we feel about Jacob Berry, and I don't necessarily agree with that value. If they're able to get that type of value for him right now, that'd be great.
How is he over Salas? Even with the Tommy John, I don't care.
Salas lost a lot of value this year, I think. Not a lot, but he lost.
I think he does a lot more than Berry personally, and I think they're low on Yiddy too. But
I
whatever.
agree. How does he have more than Salas? He doesn't have that much more than Salas, so I see it because he's closer to the big leagues and he has probably
right. So the mistake that most people make with this site when they put together their proposals is in the proposals it only shows that column all the way on the side, the median value. But the reality is there's just there are error bars to this. These three numbers on the side, there's kind of a range between how these players might actually be valued at the time based on certain teams, and you could see for some guys the variance is tens of millions of dollars of surplus value. So I think I find this site more useful when you think about that whole range of things. And when you realize that you don't try to boil things down to a single number, but rather kind of a range of values potentially that they could be at the moment. Anyway, this is just one perspective on it. I've been I've tried to emphasize how frustrated it's been to see the rumors come out about the Marlins, making basically anybody available, listening on everybody, which I feel is such a backwards approach, considering that they should be in a mode where they're trying to acquire specific reinforcements.
Yeah.
And, just based on everything we've been hearing, it feels like this passive energy that they're exuding. That's kind of the one thing that, in general, I feel that fans are responding to in a certain way, where it doesn't feel like there are specific goals that this team has, or that they don't feel specific enough about the targets to acquire any of them. where, they show interest in these guys. There's a general type of player that they're looking at, but there's just like not a conviction in anybody in particular to push them to actually make acquisitions.
Like, I thought the same way, Eli, when those tweets came out like earlier, like before the winter meetings. Like, we're listening on everybody. The Marlins are listening on everybody. They're taking phone calls. Who are you calling yourself? Right? Like, what are you doing? Like, how aggressive are you being? Like, I agree with that sentiment from fans, and the frustration is warranted, I would say. But I think me and Isaac called it out earlier before the offseason even started and free agency even started. Basically, we just said we don't expect them to do much in free agency because they just either don't have the money or they just aren't enamored enough with any one target to spend the money, right? So I think that's exactly what you saw, and it's nothing new, unfortunately.
I assume Eli, this. I assume that based on money alone, that Avi Garcia is the least valuable player in that.
Yeah,
one.
he's negative. Yes, he's pretty deep underwater, as they say.
Both Soler and Garcia by surplus value have been tanked because they provide nothing and are paid a lot of money. That's also conversely why Sandy is so high, because he gets paid a lot he gets paid very little to do a lot. I should say.
Yeah.
We knew it in the moment, but this offseason reinforces more like how insanely efficient that Sandy contract is compared to other starting pitchers. If over the next 4 years, the fact that he's making what Verlander will make at age 40 in that one season alone compared to the next 4 years of Sandy. And yeah, so that's the one move. Whenever people are critical about Kim Ng, you could always come back to one example of just an amazing bit of timing and contract structure when it comes to Sandy and getting that done in such a way that should benefit the team in the long run, whether he's pitching for them or maybe eventually when he gets traded. Not this offseason, not next offseason, but we'll see where the rest of the team is down the road. To cap this off, I just wanted to give people a view of what they've done this offseason. I think this is everybody. I think these are the offseason additions that they've made from outside the organization.
Who the fuck are they?
There was this 4-player trade with the Rays to get Xavier Edwards and JT Chagua. There have been, from what we know so far, at least 3 minor league signings with invites to spring training. That's Austin Allen, Alex Dugote, and Jeff Hartlieb. Those guys will be in camp, try to make the team. And then on the right side, those are your Rule 5 pickups. Nick Enright in the major league phase, Myers, Roberts, and Charlet on the minor league side.
And Eli, you can't forget. I think they got a guy, Remington Batista from.
Oh, thank you. I knew I was
Henry
missing
trade.
somebody. Yes,
Teenager,
yes.
2028 All-Star Remington
God
Batista.
damn it, Eli! How the fuck can you forget him?
I put this together at the last moment off the top of my head, but Remington Batista, teenage outfielder from the DR, as the Peyton Henry trade. Yep.
Good job, Isaac. What a god.
Future stud.
What a god.
So
I think
imagine
this has everything you need to know right there.
Yep. I imagine there'll be more in the coming days. It is a cliche, but it is true in some cases that the winter meetings lay the groundwork for actual things to get done, especially on the trade front when these teams are focused on free agency first. It's not a surprise to see in the days after the winter meetings that things actually could get done. So we'll cross our fingers for that because we need something to talk about next Wednesday. Otherwise, we got to do Jeopardy again or something like that.
They want to ask one thing to you guys. So in the event that I know it's at the hour mark, but in the event that we do trade for Brian Reynolds, the Marlins trade for Brian. Okay, yeah, the Marlins trade for Brian Reynolds. Do we believe that they will be awarding him a contract extension, or do you believe that we'll be letting him walk?
I think so.
Just get the player first.
I think they're getting him and extending him.
Okay.
I don't think so.
I will say that I do disagree on that matter. I know that Craig Mish is as locked in on the Brian Reynolds front as anybody, in the way he actually put together a thread, one of the few threads he put together, trying to explain that he believes that around a 6-year contract extension would be appropriate for both sides. I don't know if I buy into that. In my mind, I do see a lot of similarities between Brian Reynolds now and JT Realmuto 4 years ago. It's the exact same tactic, the trade request coming from the same agency, They're both represented by both of them being basically the same stage of their careers in terms of performance and in terms of age and in terms of ultimately the kind of contract they're going for. As we know with JT, he did ultimately stay with the Phillies, but he went to free agency first, and they won the bidding war to give him that deal that he was looking for at the end of the day. And in Reynolds' case, there is more club control than JT. It's 3 full years already, and I don't feel that's an area where you absolutely need to extend right away. I could see it going both ways, but in his case, I'm with a lot of other people that I feel would be a great fit, and I think it would be worth whatever the Pirates ultimately expect to get in return. But I think it could work with or without an immediate extension. It's he's in a sweet spot of his career where it just makes a lot of sense to bring him in, and I don't think that's an essential component of it to happen right away.
I'm just thinking if we're giving up some of our top talent and some of the best pieces that we have, getting that extension done is probably just as important as the trade itself. Because if you're going to be liquidating your best players just in 2.5 years for him to leave, then it's going to be, it's not the best situation. We've seen it happen before. I just feel like that paradigm shift is something that has to happen in the front office to really understand that, hey, you're losing all these guys. Once you trade them, you're going to have to, in order to accrue some of that value for the future, try to re-sign him or try to work out some sort of deal to have him stay long-term in Miami.
Yeah, it would definitely be dope if they sign him to an extension next offseason, for example. But I don't think this is that situation where you're only trading for him if you can have a guaranteed contract before you do that. And Craig's saying that it's just them being buddy-buddy with CAA. They should, get the player, and if you can sign him, great. If not, enjoy 3 years of Brian Reynolds, and that's it.
Yeah, you're right. I think I agree with you, Isaac, and Eli. I mean, obviously, it would be cool. You're trading long-term pieces probably to the Pirates to get Brian Reynolds, right? So you want a guy that's going to be around for a while, at least help out longer term than just 3 years. But if it is just 3 years, you get 3 years of cornerstone center fielder. So I think either way that they go, I don't think it's a necessity at this point. If you're talking next year and there's one less year of control, maybe. But I think right now they would be fine with or without the extension. So we'll see.
What was the most recent example of them trading for someone, but they had to have or someone trading for a player where they only would do it if there was an extension in place?
I can think of this is not the most recent one. I remember very vividly R.A. Dickey when he went from the Mets to the Blue Jays near the end of his career. And that didn't even work out.
Oh, the Lindor one.
Lindor is – well, no, that was not immediate. I mean, that happens – they went all the way to opening day.
Or was it Mookie? No. It was one of these guys. They're like, oh, we're only training for you. But that's only a necessity when they're 1 year away from free agency. When you're 3 full seasons away, you're not going to – that's not even a thing you're thinking about. I can guarantee you, as far away as Brian Reynolds is on Kim Ng's mind, probably just kidding, an extension for Brian Reynolds is even further. So I don't think that's something –
I think you said it right. Get the player first, and then worry about it after that.
Get the player to sign him next year. So you don't. Hey, he digressed a little bit. Regress. I'm sorry. He was the worst center fielder in all of baseball this year. So let's see what happens at Lone Depot Park. Maybe he's a corner outfielder. It's not even that expensive.
Yeah, plenty of time to talk about that. I imagine. I think that's going to be a drawn out process. I predict he's going to be traded this offseason, but probably towards the end of the offseason once they can really get the best offers from all the interested teams. There will be a lot of interested teams in Brian Reynolds. From Eli Sussman, both of the Isaacs, Adam Akbani, Alex Carver here on Fish Stripes Live. Thank you for joining us. As Navi mentions in the chat,
Brian Reynolds.
About emergency Twitter spaces. Yeah, well, if they do something on anything, we'll in between now and the next stream day on next Wednesday, we'll be sure to cover anything live that they do that's interesting, because we've been starved for interesting moves. Thanks everybody for tuning in. If nothing else, we'll be back a week from now talking all things Marlins here on Fish Stripes. As always, go fish.
We got to end it off right. We got to